today we have our speaker, Chen, which I believe most of you are very familiar with and already know. She is the co-founder and also president of the Product Hub and also the director of product innovations at Netflix. I personally am very impressed by her unique experience within both academic and industry, which you'll learn later. And today the agenda is we'll spend the first hour to go through the presentation with Chen, and then we'll save half an hour to 1 hour for the Q&A. Sounds good? Cool, then we can start.
Thank you. This is a topic I really fun to share, and I prepare not just some sort of meaty stuff about product launch, also hopefully some very entertaining video for you. Anyhow, so the title of the talk is about secrets of product launch. I'm going to talk about this from an angle of how we avoid failure, because the opposite of failure is success. So before I start, let me quickly just go through my own experience. I think some wise man or woman said, PM is really the intersection of UX, tech, and business. I was somewhat in the middle. And my own journey is kind of like a random walk, goes through different circle of that journey and eventually landed in the middle. It actually started with tech. I was a scientist at Stanford doing astrophysics research. But Stanford, as you know, there's a lot of entrepreneurs, and there's a specific department called MSE, Management Science and Engineering. They actually offer classes like entrepreneurship or how to start a venture. So I would say, like, lucky me, I found that class and joined, and it really sort of like brainwashed me in some way. I realized my passion lies in business instead of actually just technology and science. So because of that, I sort of take a big turn into the business circle and joined Google after I graduated. I started with a team. Their mission was trying to use Google's infrastructure to build business intelligence applications for Google's own use cases. You can think about, for example, data warehousing or financial tools like budgeting tools or operational tools, access management tools. So as you can see, it's very like a business intelligence and enterprise focused types of products, which I had no experience with. But nevertheless, I joined them. And I joined them as one of the business system integrator analysts. And it turns out I was the only one in the team when the rest of the team were engineers. So we didn't have PMs, we didn't have designers, we didn't have marketers, just me and also the programmers. So I end up sort of doing everything they are not doing and effectively train myself to be a product manager. And that sort of get me to the circle of UX. I start learning design, start taking classes, start going to office hours of designers at Google, and bit by bit sort of opened me up to a very brand new area, and also fell in love with kind of like in general product experience. So eventually I went to an internal team called Google Express, which is a shopping product. If some of you know, this is kind of like a same day delivery product Google developed many years ago. So I joined it there, and from that product, I got a bit of experience on bit of everything regarding e-commerce, starting with the data warehousing products, because that's where I started with, but then end up also building mobile applications and the logistic applications, and eventually sort of got exposed to machine learning. So that become part of my experience. Specifically, it's like search recommendations. That's where I got a call from Instagram, because they were at a pivot point, so we're trying to build a consumption org. As many of you know, Instagram started as a creation tools, right? It's like a filter camera. And at the time when I joined them, which is 2014, 2015, they had tons of data already, and they are building their sort of search and explore product. So I was very fortunate to get that opportunity to join them as the first machine learning PM and start helping them build that org. And so that's kind of like a lot of a journey of UX, but coming back to the tech, which is through machine learning. It was very fun 1 year and a half. I later going to talk about some of the examples we have regarding product launch from Instagram. It's really, really interesting. And then in the middle of that sort of experience at Instagram, we decided to start building an office in New York. So part of my team actually was shifted to New York because we want to start a feed ranking team there. So by the time when we roll out feed ranking and build the whole feed team, it's very clear to all of us that we need a PM team in New York too, because I didn't want to go there, so I left. And so joined the Facebook. So that's kind of like my Facebook journey started. And from there, actually, I got back to the business side because I started working on e-commerce again. And it was a good team trying to figure out like how to leverage the social media advantage Facebook have to break into the e-commerce space. Again, and many of you know, Amazon is really dominating in US markets. Hence, the strategy I came up with, like, we need to go somewhere else. So we end up start with in like emerging markets like Southeast Asia, specific Thailand. And that's also how I got to know the founding team at Wish, because they were doing cross-border e-commerce business. So eventually, I went to Wish to build merchant platform. So kind of like, you know, spent a lot more time in business. And then recently, I joined Netflix just 6 months ago. Because after working on e-commerce for another 2-3 years, I realized I still have this undying desire for machine learning products. So now I'm working on recommendation systems at Netflix. So a little bit of lengthy introduction about my background, but as you can see, I'm probably very similar as a lot of the product managers in the Valley. We kind of take experience in different areas, but ultimately all those experience help us become better product person. All right, and then a few more words on Product Hub for some of the members here. You probably already heard about this pitch many times, but for some of you who just joined us first time, Product Hub is actually a nonprofit organization. We started roughly maybe 15 months ago, 16 months ago. Yeah, July of 2018. Yeah, so it has been a while. Initially, it was just a bunch of product managers. We wanted to meet together, just like this forum. We started with like 8-9 people and discussing our famous, favorite e-commerce applications. At the time it was Pinduoduo, right? And then bit by bit, we realized this is kind of a bi-weekly meetup. It's really a fashion experience for the product people to sort of share our common challenges and learnings. It feels like a village to us. So we start building this community. And by now we actually have, I think on the website, we have like 800, 900 subscribers.
Over 1,000.
Yeah, over 1,000, yeah. So it really has been a long journey. And thanks to many of your support. Now we have a very clear mission. We really want to use this bi-weekly meetup to empower people with product minds and global perspectives. So some of our content, like today, the talk is really about product mind. It's about how to be a better product person. But some of the talks is more about global perspective. Like last time, we had a senior designer manager from Alibaba who were talking about the difference in design between America and China, which was really inspiring. So if you're interested in either topic or both, let us know. We actually have pretty ongoing schedule for all sorts of talks. All right, so much so about introduction. Let's dive into product launch. So before I talk about nuances of product launch, I always like to give a definition so that we share the same sort of like common ground. What we talk about today is product launch. So actually, before I share with you my definition, I'm just curious how you guys think about what product launch is. Will anyone volunteer to give your definition? Raise your hands. Or I'm gonna just call one of you. How about this gentleman in yellow jacket? You're wearing very shiny, you know, I have to point out. Okay, rolling out a product to general public. That's a good definition. Anyone disagree with him?
Or also to align with your sales team, go to market, and also sometimes legal to align with all the stakeholders to make sure your launch is successful.
Okay, this is a much more comprehensive definition. So involve a lot of process, involving a lot of stakeholders, right? But in general, you guys are still agreeing it's kind of like a go-to market, right? Any other people have different opinions or something to add on? All right. So this is kind of like a little bit more graphic definition of what product launch is. I think when I think about product launch, literally, I'm thinking of a rocket going into the space. It's somewhat like that. It's the debut of a product into the market, so kind of like what you two share, but it's also kind of a very thrilling process because think about launching a rocket into the sky, right? It takes a lot of planning. It takes a lot of people to coordinate. It's a moment that you don't want to miss. And it's a moment that if you somehow make mistakes, that can go really, really wrong. And it's also a moment sort of determine the future of the success of this particular project, right? So that's why I feel like it's, in many ways, it is just like a rocket launch. It's a very delicate process. And it's also a process that worth celebrating if you did it correctly. And so with this image in mind, I want to talk about why product launch is important. And I hope, yeah, go ahead.
The question is, I'm wondering, when we talk about product launch, is it talking about beta or alpha?
So I'm literally talking about the introduction of product into the market. So alpha, beta, I would say is just one way of introducing the product to the market. So it's kind of like slowly getting there. There's also product launch that just skipping alpha, beta, just directly go there, right? So this is just one of the, I would say, manifestation of a specific product launch. But if you gonna expose your product to the general public, right, to the market, that is the launch. Whether you consciously planned it or you not consciously planned it.
But it's not referring to the restriction of limited audience.
Limited audience, that's a good question. I would think market itself is not necessarily like, I don't believe every product, except for you or Google or Facebook, they're like big company. Even you launch to kind of so-called public, right? Only some people know about it. So in that way, you're thinking about your alpha beta launch is basically a public launch of a small product, right? So it's kind of very similar. So I wouldn't constrain by the size of the audience. It's really like when you feel you're ready to introduce this product into the market. And when, of course, if you just like a couple of people, then you don't need to think too thoroughly about it, and then you have time to sort of try and fail, right? But if you have millions of people in consideration, then that risk is much higher, and you need to be a little bit more careful. Which actually a good segue to this question, why we think about product launch and why we think that this is really important. I think it's come down to this sentence: first impression matters. You know, think about when you meet, your important, your significant other, or when you meet with your manager, or you are interviewing for a job, right? A lot of times, the first impression sort of determines half of the success. And then if that works for a person, it works for a product. So I want to give a little cute video here. As I said, I'm going to have a lot of fun entertainment stuff today. I'm just going to play it, see whether it can have the sound. Let's see. Oh, no, it doesn't work. Hold on. I clicked the wrong thing. Wait, how do I stop it? Hold on. How do I stop it? Sorry, I clicked some wrong button.
Can we do here?
No, not this slide.
We can go back to prison.
Yes.
It's pretty slow. My computer is slow.
Go back. Go back to orange.
This is a failed example of first impression. I was supposed to show you
Can we do
some
now?
very cute video, but oh no, this one.
Oh, okay.
This is actually we clicked into a lot of the slides.
It's,
Go back to the front.
well, it's slow.
I think it's because I clicked this on autoplay, so the slides start autoplaying. We may have to quit from the present state.
Oh, no. But I'm not sure if we are able to play the video from here. I'm just not sure.
Wouldn't work?
Wait, what's going on here?
Close the camera.
I can go to the slide. Sorry.
I'm just trying to.
Close it.
Video wouldn't work? That's gonna be hard. Oh, I can't play the video.
I don't know. I'm gonna try.
Oh, it should work. All right. Sorry, we solved it. I think that. Oh no. This doesn't play the video. Is it possible to play it? Oh, it's playing. Great. All right. Can I make it a sound? Does it have a sound?
The speed may not be good.
Yeah, I don't know whether any of you remember that launch moment of Instagram Zoom. So for those of you who are not familiar about this feature, for years, you cannot Zoom photos on Instagram. So a lot of the moms and grandparents are really complaining, like, why can't I Zoom my, little cutie babies' pictures? Eventually, our product team decided to work on it. Actually, I was the PM who launched this product. But it's a small feature, but it is a very significant milestone for Instagram as well. We call it like Delight All the Moms in the World project. And so when we decided to launch it, me and my PMM just was discussing, like, it doesn't feel like just writing a TechCrunch blog post, sort of like describe the sentiment of this launch. Really what we're trying to do is delight all the moms in the world, as the mission statement says. And then what they were looking for is something really cute, right? So we're thinking about the audience. And can we do it in a way that is very Instagrammy, really effective, not big budget? Because it is a small feature. We don't want to burn like millions of dollars of it. So we're like, okay, we should just have Instagram's Instagram account publish something, maybe a picture, maybe a video. And eventually we landed on this idea, as you can see. It was really cute, right? Like you were like looking at a bunch of stuffed animal, like what am I looking at this? And suddenly zoom, and turns out one of the stuffed animal was a little puppy. So that launch post was a huge success. And I use this as like a visual example to convey, launch moment like this, first impression matters a lot. And then this particular post got shared like by a lot of Instagram enthusiasts. And this feature instantly sort of like spread out organically. And we didn't have to do any big sort of launch moment or ask some media to write about it. It just the story got picked up everywhere. And all we did was just this video. And it was, I think it was like a $10,000 or a few $1,000 budget. So really, really small. So this is the example. If you do it right, you don't need a lot of cost to cause a big splash in the world. All right, let's talk about a little bit more on the business side of the reasons. I think in general, depends on what products you are working on. If you're working on, for example, a product that it really relies on an effective business model to sort of like gain money and make sure your company can run, then a lot of those reasons is really important. For example, you need to do the product launch to generate the initial sort of attraction, right? Acquire customers. You also sometimes need to do the product launch to explain your motivation because this is your debut. And if your company's first product is this, product launch, then the debut of the product is also the debut of the company. Then explain your motivation to your customers or target audience is super crucial. And obviously, a lot of companies also do product launch to increase revenue. One example, I don't know whether a lot of you are familiar with this. The ladies in the room probably are familiar with this. Cosmetic companies, they do tons of a product launch all the time, right? You can have like new colors and new kind of like cosmetic products almost every month. Why do they do that? It's because they want to increase the revenue and also maintain that sort of freshness of the brand image in the market. And obviously, if you do product launch correctly, you can also expand your impact, your influence. You can attract a lot of fans out there, and those fans are your potential customers or potential sort of ambassadors for your brand, for your product, for your services. And you also can improve your reputation. A company that doesn't do product launch correctly sometimes actually get a really back step in terms of their reputation. But the company who does product launch really wonderfully, they actually have a boost in their branding. And then later on, we'll show you a few success examples and a few failure examples. And sometimes people also do product launch to gain strategic advantage because this is like, announcing a certain positioning of your product to the world is also helping you attracting potential partners and potential sort of like deals, especially for 2B companies or enterprise companies. This is an important strategy. And there's a million other reasons I can sort of talk about the whole day, but this is kind of a rough list of why product launches are really important. Yeah.
So you launch a product, your results, or success metrics, right? There's now a few questions on success metrics. The first question I have is say, so when you define a success metrics, you analyze all your actual information, and then you say, okay, within a year, I'm going to increase the usage or whatever, like by 10%. But sometimes I do not find like a strong number saying increase 10% is my success metrics, or 20%. Why not increase 30%? What is the achievable goal, or what is the, say, realistic number? So normally, how will we decide that number?
Yeah, so first of all, for the online audience, the question is really about how to define success metrics for product launch, and then sometimes how to have a realistic goal regarding that metric, like how do we know this is successful, right? Like is it 10%, 20%, 30%, how do we figure this out? So we actually have a separate metric workshop recently just concluded a few weeks ago. Too bad you missed it. This is by itself is another topic, big topic, art. I wouldn't say like defining the metric itself is a really important thing for a product team. And hopefully this should tie into your strategy, whatever your product vision is. And then it's not like every company, every product has the same set of metrics. So if you want to answer this question, the first part is finding the right metric that can reflect your strategy here, right? Remember, like I listed so many goals of the product launch. So let's say each goal is one of the different strategy. So it depends on what your goal is, your metric will be very different, right?
Right, so I know what the metric is. So let's say my metric is my goal is to increase the usage of this feature, right? So I say I want to increase 10%.
Yeah.
When I present the executive team, they will say, okay, why not 20%?
Yes.
It's really, so how can I know metrics, but how can I define as that accurate number?
Yeah.
Sometimes I cannot find the data to support my
yeah. So I actually haven't finished. First step, you do need to know the right metric. And sometimes you say, I know my metric. That doesn't necessarily mean the metric you select was the right reflection of your strategy or your goal, right? And then secondly, when you define your strategy and your goal, you need to be pretty clear what kind of the end state you want to end up with. For example, let's take one of the goal here. Let's say we want to generate attention, right? I don't think a specific number is going to be sufficient to say this is successful. Let's say if it's a startup company, they say, I got 1 million new audience in a month. That might be really impressive because how many startup company can do that, right? But let's say this is Google. You may think 1 million is a very small number, right? You get what I'm talking about. This is really a relative sort of measurement that is very tied into your ultimate sort of vision here. If your vision say, I launched this product, I want to be market like dominant. I want to be the #1 leading sort of company in this area, then your goal, your success, metric and the value you want to achieve will be very different from, let's say, a startup. Say, I just want to make a dent. I want to be enough to get Series A funding, right? These two could be like completely the same product, but their numerical value will vary a lot. So ultimately, it's like a back of the envelope calculation. You have to figure out what do you want in the end, right? Do you want this product to be your vehicle to get funding? Or you want this product to be a vehicle to prove a hypothesis, right? Or do you want this product to be a vehicle to help your company diversify your investments? Or you want this product simply just delight all the moms in the world, right? These are all very different purpose. Even it could be the same product. And then based on the different purpose, your numerical value of so-called success metric will be very different. So I wouldn't say this is like one size fits all solution for any of you, right? It really depends on what your end goal is. And that's why in general, product management always is kind of like art and science. There's the science part is there's a logic, there's a framework behind it. The art is each situation is so unique and different, right? You can't just take one example to apply together. You have to figure out that piece yourself. So that's my best part. We will do more Q&A later, so yeah.
I think there are really good questions, but we can save that later. So, thank you.
All right. Let's go to the next one. All right, so another thing, I just want to share some data points. Although we all talk about product launch, especially the product people in the room, but really 80% of new products introduced each year fail. So this thing is not easy to do. You could say like, I have done product launch, but if you review all the products have launched, and then maybe 3 years later, 5 years later, how many of them still successful, right? And if you take that into consideration, the success rate is actually really low. So that's why even everyone probably have some idea of how to launch a product, but how to launch a product successfully is a much harder job. And that's why we're here today. Hopefully I can share some lessons I've learned. All right, now I want to talk about the next topic. As I mentioned earlier, in order to talk about how to successfully launch a product, I would like to talk about how you can make a product launch fail. Because if we know some big pitfalls and avoid them, at least it increases your chance to be successful. I still cannot guarantee your product will launch successfully because there's also other factors in the markets, right? Sometimes some of the markets are not in your control. Let's say you're a cross-border e-commerce company. You're selling products from China to America. You may have done everything correctly, everything perfectly, but then there's a trade war now, and which is not something you can control. Right? So this kind of scenario will still happen, but at least as a product person, hopefully through today's discussion, I can help you avoid some of the major and also very common pitfalls. Actually, if you can avoid those, you're already ahead of the curve because most of the product launch failure are belonging to the following reasons. All right, the first one, I just want to share a quote from a professor from Stanford. Remember I was mentioning MSE department from Stanford. Steve Blank is a professor for that department. And I went to his class, which sort of changed my life course. It's called a Technology Venture Formation. And he himself is a very successful entrepreneur. He wrote several books that is very influential in the Silicon Valley and for the entrepreneurs. He has a very famous quote, reads just like this. Like most startups fail due to the failure of, not due to the failure of product development, but due to lack of customers. Sounds familiar? Right? Maybe you have heard of something similar, but from different people, but it's kind of about the same thing. I want to give you a few failure examples. For example, the famous Google Plus. Maybe I'm too old to remember this product. How many of you remember this product? Yeah, yeah? All know what I'm talking about? Google Plus? Yes? For those of you who are too young to know, this is a failed attempt that Google did trying to take over Facebook. Basically, they realized social is a thing. That was many, many years ago. So Google launched this whole kind of like, I would say, product campaign trying to use the entire Google's company's resource to work on social. And they have a lot of great features, as you can see. Hangouts, Sparks, Huddle, Circles, instant uploads, a lot of them. They have this 100-day launch schedule. Say, every day, every week, we're gonna have something new coming out to the market. And they use all Google's money to inform different channels, say, hey, we are getting so much user, we're getting so much traction, and here are those influencers who are creating content, yada, 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 yada. So in some sense, you can say, in the traditional sense of product launch, they did a really excellent job. But what is the outcome? I guess a lot of you probably remember how epic the product fails. To the point, I actually want to share this little cute video. This is a passionate anti-Google Plus user wrote to Google.
Woke up this morning and checked my Twitter. Went on Facebook and moaned about the weather. And then I checked my friends' updates on Google Plus. When no one thinks it sucked. And I make their request step back. It's a YouTube, fuck it in the apps. Leave us alone. We just want to make this video. We just want our website back. Why is it so hard to understand? Fuck you, Google Plus. We don't want your fucking fuss. You threw in that slide and called it integration. While writing this song just to vent my frustration. Fuck you, Google Plus.
All right. This goes on for like several minutes. I'm not gonna play the full song, but as you can see, when your product, failed epically, the anti-fans will even write a very nice song. The song is very actually pleasant to hear about you. And this was actually specific to an incident that Google Plus trying to push integration with all sorts of Google services, including YouTube. And it caused a huge problem with all the fans of YouTube. People's like, just leave our website alone to not do this so-called integration. So try not to be the next Google Plus. And another failure, I don't know whether you remember this one. Do any of you know this, what I'm talking about? Juicelo? Yeah? It's a very expensive product. I think it's $400, $450 cold pressed juicing system. And a lot of famous VCs in the Valley threw money at them to the point they burned $120 million in 2 years. So for some entrepreneurs in the audience, that's a lot of money, right? If you got $120 million, you can build almost anything. But this company burned it through 2 years, and then they just disappeared. Why? Because they invented some very futuristic looking, product, and then once. It's not really a solid customer need. I mean, there's some people want this. So when they initially testing, when we're talking about alpha, beta, right? It was received well because there's some wealthy guys in the Valley who will always fancy that sort of device and they will pay for that. But once they beyond that phase and they go further to the mass market, no one gonna buy, no one gonna pay $450 just to pressing a bag of things into a juice. You can just buy a $20 juicer from Amazon and can do that job very well. So that's another kind of like epic failure when the whole, they have probably the very best designers, engineering team, product manager, but they deliver a product that no one wants. So please, the first lesson of all product people, develop something people want, right? Because otherwise, no matter how dramatic, how excellent your product launch team is, it's not gonna save you.
One question.
that when they launch that product, they must do some marketing research. So why that marketing research is valid in that case?
Well, marketing research is a loaded word, right? Depends on how you do it. If you hire some like expensive, consulting company through like millions of dollars at them, ask them to do an elaborate survey, and depends on the questions you put on the survey, you may get some results that the product team wants, but is not reflective of the real market needs, right? So I think, as I said, product management is art and science, right? There are always some methodology you're all probably familiar with, but the tricky part is how you use those tools, right? And I have seen surveys that are being designed in very elaborative, nice way, but eventually deliver something really wrong insights. Actually, the best way, I think, for entrepreneurs, especially in the company, you may have researchers, but in I know some of you are from smaller companies, you don't have researchers, you don't have elaborate marketing budget to do a survey. Just try to go out and talk to a customer. Like you could get a lot more value insights than running elaborate market research. Yeah. And then, so I'm just throwing a little bit sort of a framework here. As I said, there's a science part. How do you understand customer needs? I mean, by itself, it can be its own course, multiple lectures. But ultimately, if I condense them into a few slides, I think really important is trying to understand who you are trying to serve and what kind of a problem they're facing and what are your goals in solving them. So let's start with a very practical example. One way of finding those problems and those real needs is starting from yourself, right? So I don't know whether many of you know about this example from Elon Musk. He recently had a company called Board. Have any of you heard about it? And that was literally just from his own frustration with the LA traffic. He was trying to go from his office, drive to the airport, and there was so much traffic, he just stuck there, and literally just stuck there. Then he came back and wrote this proposal and actually put together a very quick demo video about how he can transform logistics, transform transportation dramatically. And hence he start working on Board. So that's one way. You kind of start from your own problem. There's another story. I don't know how many of you are mothers. So there's a breastfeeding pillow called My Best Friend, which is really like one of the bestseller products on Amazon for mom-to-be's. And the inventor of that product was actually a man who is not a father, nor a mother for sure, but he heard of the problem from one of his friends, because his friends just had like a baby. And his friend was complaining all these different sort of like pillows, how she like struggled with the position of feeding the baby. And he's like, oh, that's interesting. Sounds like a real pain point. So he basically he was not even a product designer per se, but he just went to get some form and try different kind of pillow. And like his friend tried. So he has a customer who was very passionate to help him. And bit by bit, he developed that prototype. And then he turned that into a product. So eventually that product got launched and sold a lot of copies on Amazon. So that's another story. Another angle you can think of this is really thinking about people's fundamental motivation, right? They are kind of like psychic, kind of like a measurement. Try to think about the negative emotion and the positive emotion. So a lot of the needs I talked about earlier was, you can say, it's physical pain points, right? People have this need and they don't have a good solution, hence you go solve it. But sometimes you could also just create a product to evoke some emotion from people. And that could also be a great product. For example, all the social media, it really is solving your emotional needs, right? They make you feel good or feel bad, and hence you're addictive. So a lot of content products or social media products or entertainment products, in some way you can say Netflix is like that kind of product. What we are really serving people is help them satisfy that kind of a media of the emotional state. So that's another way of thinking about product needs. All right, since this talk is not about how to find the consumer needs, I'll just stop here. One kind of thing ties everything together in this pyramid. Just always remember there's this like hierarchical of needs. and think about your product, where are the needs that you try to appeal to. And then the more fundamental the needs you appeal to, the bigger market you get, but also lower margin you get. That's kind of the trade-off. The higher you go, you have a less audience, but you potentially can get a higher sort of like margin. So, all right, so great product with a round target also will fail. This is another lesson I learned. One example, how many of you remember iPod? Yeah, that's a kind of the first revolutionary sort of product before iPhone, Apple introduced after all the Mac computer. But meanwhile, Microsoft at the time were developing a product called Zoom. And it's actually really not a bad product. Even today, if you go to YouTube, you search that Z-U-N-E, you will find a like testing video of this product. And in many ways, that's a great product. It has no problem. So it solves the need, you know, it solves the music needs. So it fits the first criteria. But this product never gained major attraction per se. So what's the problem here? Actually, want to make this a little bit more interactive. Can any of you tell me why they missed the mark?
The product is not good enough to compensate the switching cost.
Yes, correct, switch cost. The timing was really poor, right? If they developed this before iPod, they probably would be the iPod. They were dominating the market because they were solving the right needs. But they launched kind of like after iPod was launched. So at that time, a lot of the people already sort of like bought the iPod and they really loved iPod. And iPod was expensive, right? If you already own an iPod and then you just got a Zoom, you're not gonna pay another like a few $100 to get a similar product. Even that product in some way smaller degree is better than the Apple you own. You're not gonna switch it. So hence, Zoom never took off. I remember several people asked me this question in the questionnaire that you asked about, like, what is the good timing of product launch, right? This is also an example of failure that choose a poor timing. So in some way, when you are figuring out your new product, whether it's digital, physical, or emotional, you have to be aware of what is out there, right? So maybe your product start being developed like a year ago, and the need was there, and there's no comparable product. But along the way, when you're developing, you're a little bit too slow. Some other competitor who saw the same need launched their product. Then you kind of miss the timing. So timing, if you want to answer the question, it's really about the market dynamics. Are you there strategically to fulfill a gap in terms of the need, right? And if the gap is being fulfilled and then you launch, then you miss the mark. But if that gap is going to be widened over the time, even when the competitor product are launched, then your launch will still be fine. So in some way, you are not just looking at the consumer needs, you also have to look at the whole market dynamics and the ecosystem, how things are changing, so that you can determine when is the right timing. Yes?
I'm just wondering, do you think that branding also make a difference? Because for some reason, the app will make it sound more fancy.
It could be, yes. I think, oh, sorry, I'll repeat the question. The question is, do I think branding is a factor here, right? And maybe iPhone, iPod is like more fancy, and so hence like create that kind of buzz and desire for owning it. Certainly, I think this is actually, branding is somewhat about positioning. It's actually related to identifying your craft, right? I think Apple, from the very beginning, they understand who are their audience. Their audience are the people who are trendsetters, who have a decent income, who like to be trendy, right? Who like to be leading kind of the behavior in the market, and who like to be considered as they're cool. They're not someone who repeating others, right? So there's a certain sort of crowd in their mind. Hence, they're building their brand to attract that crowd. It's not accidental. When I think Microsoft, from the very beginning, even today, it's more kind of like it's tailored to techie people, right? They're not necessarily the most cool people. They're more like people who want functions in some way. And hence, I think in some way these two are not the same kind of a branding. But Microsoft is trying to go after the same audience as iPod. That was also certainly fair. So timing and the crowd is kind of go hand in hand, right? If you're going after the same people and then you have a competitive product, you miss the timing. But you can say, maybe we should just differentiate and go after some other people, like totally, not the same crowd, then maybe Zheng will have a future. So one successful example, I have to mention Wish. Wish, I think was developed roughly 7 years ago. At that time, Amazon is already pretty dominant in US, right? So if you are an e-commerce entrepreneur, you want to do something general like an Amazon platform, you have to figure out a way to differentiate yourself from Amazon. Like that's just like no way around it, right? So there's many different ways to differentiate yourself from Amazon. Some people pick a product category, say, I'm not gonna be a platform for all products. Some people are gonna say, you know what, Amazon is service all these rich people who have a little bit more money, so they care more about convenience and delivery speed and customer service. Hence, I'm gonna go after the opposite. There are still a lot of people who don't have so much income, and they may be more sensitive to price. They may be willing to sacrifice some delivery speed, right? Instead of, let's say, 2-day delivery, they can wait for a week, or even 2 weeks, if they can get the product 5 times cheaper. Do those people exist? Yes, they do, right? And do Amazon address those people's needs? They don't. So that's exactly what Wish went after. So they identify their crowd. And when they identify the crowd, they also figure out their product needs to be on mobile, because a lot of those people are not shopping on website. They're not that, again, techy. They're not actually caring about delivery speed. Hence, they actually get their products from China, from Latin America. So the delivery speed is really long, like 2 weeks, sometimes even a month. But the prices they can deliver to the end consumer is way cheaper than Amazon. So that works. So this is a successful example. When you identify the right crowd, you can solve the problem. All right, so that's lesson 2. And the way how we can actually identify the right crowd is actually through a very elaborative, conscious planning process. I think one of the questions, or 2 questions in the questionnaire also asked me about this, like, how do you plan the launch? How do you work with different stakeholders, right? And how to actually figure out when to do what. So I hope this gives you a little framework to think about your launch process. Ultimately, you have to start still from the beginning. Who are your, what's your hypothesis? Let's say start with that. What is your strategy? What is your goal? What is your vision? And hence, what is your hypothesis? With that hypothesis, hopefully you know who the audience is, which we just spend a lot of time talking about. And if you know who your audience is, let's say for Wish, right? This is the bunch of people who want good products, but don't want to pay a lot of money, and they're willing to sacrifice time and convenience to get them. Then you can access that, figure out how you're going to reach to those audience. Because ultimately, product launch is bringing your product to those people, right? You need to figure out what's the right channel to bring your product to those people. And then again, using Wish as an example, the channel that we want to deliver this product, this service to those people should be something they always use. And in US, those low-income people, they still very heavy mobile users. And hence, Wish decided to do a mobile app. And then you have to also figure out, can I use different mechanisms to figure out what kind of audience can respond earlier? What kind of audience will be the followers? And what kind of audience will wait till the majority of people accept it, then I will jump in. This is kind of a theory of marketing, basically called who are the seeder, right? The seed or the leader, the influencer, who are the follower, which are the people who are sort of follow the first group of people, and then who are the people who will only wait till the last minute to join. And then you need to understand, even for your target audience, each group who they are and what kind of characteristics they are, hence what kind of channel to reach them. Once you know that, then you need to figure out, okay, now can I test, for example, with my first group of people, if I give them the product, what are the signals that are telling me I'm doing it right, I'm fulfilling their needs, and I'm reaching to those people effectively. So another successful example is like Dropbox, right? The way they set it up is like, okay, I'm just gonna have an email collection box on the website. I quickly talk about my value prop. If you are interested, please leave your email address. This is a very quick, dirty way to collect a lot of audience in a very short amount of time. And then according to Drew, the founder of Dropbox, found those email addresses. He had a lot of confidence. What he was working on is addressing a massive need. And because of this email address, he was also able to convince Y Combinator to found them, right? He became a Y Combinator founder, and all the rest of is history. It became a very successful company. And then lastly, once you know the success signal, you want to also leverage to figure out who are the adjacent audience, right? If you know the leader group, then who are the adjacent audience that are followers? And once you figure out the followers, who are the people who only move when all the followers move? So it's kind of like, you can imagine a successful launch process is not gonna be figured out from the very beginning in one shot, except for maybe a very simple product like what I just talked about, the Zoom, right? Maybe we just did it one shot, we're successful. But if your product is very complicated, you're gonna go through this process maybe once, twice, 3 times, or even more to eventually figure it out. So this could be a framework as a science part you can take home and apply to your product launch process to try to identify the ideal audience. All right, now I want to talk about some success example using this framework. I mentioned Wish. So here I want to actually talk about a little bit different example called Product Hunt. How many of you know about Product Hunt? Oh, actually not many people. All right, if you ever thought about you want to start a company, know about this channel. It itself is a good channel to use. This is where all the investors or tech enthusiasts or product people or early tech members or testers hang out. And every day there's a lot of new products in the valley or in the world launching on this platform and getting feedback. And sometimes the founders and then the testers, they will have direct dialogue and then go back and forth and get quick feedback. So, check it out. It's a really successful product. But its own launch process was actually a very classic example of the right way to do product launch and identify the right audience. So the whole product, the launch process actually took less than 24 hours. So it's actually really amazing. The first start with the founder himself. He is a very techy person. He is very enthusiastic about new technology. And he realized there was an issue that he has to go to so many different websites and newspapers and blog posts and different community to find the information about new product launch. This product, by the way, especially meant to tech product, right? Like a new app or new service or new feature. So he's like, wait, I have this problem, then there must be a similar problem for all the people out there. Then he's like, okay, I would just do a simple thing. I would just ask the people I know in his social circles whether they want to join an email list. So every day, if I have some discovery, I'll just share with them. So I just ping a few people, and a lot of people say, yeah, I will have that interest. And then the other people share with other people. So in a few hours, he gathered like a few hundred email addresses already. And so his email list was literally, I think it was a Google email list, it was already pretty long. And if he read the name, he found, oh, there are actually a lot of investors already, and also a lot of tech founders, and sound like TechCrunch, journalists. So it's kind of already healthy community. So that gave him an idea. This is an assessment period, right? The need is there. And also he has a rough kind of a hypothesis now, what kind of audience will be interested in such a kind of product, right? So just in a few hours, he already got all of that. And then he was thinking about, okay, found those people, who are the people who actually can contribute? So he go talk to the friends that he know on those email lists. And this is kind of the filtering criteria, right? Those are the kind of the early adopters because they trust him and he trusts them. So that kind of mutual respect and trust already there. So he started with that. And then he also tried to start with his email list and then start sending those information. And then interestingly, over time, like with a few hours, his friends is attracting more strangers. And eventually the whole email list grew to thousands. So remember, initially it was just a few hundred, and within 24 hours, already a few thousands. And then he realized, okay, this whole email list may not be an effective way to manage all the communication I want to have because there's too many people. So then he quickly pivoted towards the Product Hunt actual website. So that's how the website sort of come to being. And set it up is actually pretty quick process for him. So a few hours later, they have a website, and then he just launched it to all the people on the email list. And that's ta-da, how this product was launched. So I found that this particular example is like a little embodiment of this process, right? You can see how he go from the scoping to the assess to the filtering to the signal to the leverage flawlessly in one run. Of course, as I said, most of the product would not be that as similar process. You probably have to go a few rounds, but if you're really lucky, you can hit it in one round. Yes?
What's the relationship between this process and the product discovery? This sounds like I was starting from the very beginning.
Oh yeah, so this particular one, I would say, is kind of like, I wouldn't say it's normal case. In their case, they should do the product discovery and product launch all in one run. Because remember, 24 hours, how many companies will launch your product in 24 hours? But on the other hand, I would say product launch, although we think it's very detached from the product development process, right? But a real successful product launch should start from the very beginning. So that's why you probably will feel like the way I talk about it, make you feel like it's all about product discovery, which is intentional. I'll give you a very concrete example. When I joined Google Express, all the product managers were asked to write a doc whenever we have an idea. We call it one pager. And we were given a template. And the template goes like this. The first section is called launch announcement. And then when I got the template, I didn't understand. Well, boss, why do you give me a template with a launch announcement? This is an ideation doc, right? I don't know what my product is. Why do you want me to write some launch announcement? He said, this is a forcing function for you to think about. If, day 100 down the road, you want to launch this product, what this launch announcement should look like, who you should write to, and what channel you should write to, and what audience, kind of like the language you want to use to them, and what is your successful metric, what's your key message you want to deliver. If you think about this from the very beginning, on the day one of ideation, then down the road, everything it connects. So you don't have to figure out a launch strategy on day 360. Instead, you have the launch strategy at the very beginning. So things that have been embodying that kind of philosophy. So do not try to think about product launch as a last detached element. I know for a lot of our engineering friends or product people, that's a natural instinct. I don't need to worry about product launch. I'm just focusing on writing the code, focusing on developing the mocks, and focusing on doing the user research. Yes, most of the cases you can do that, but I wouldn't say you will have the most successful journey of doing our product discovery and implementation and launch. The best way is actually connecting all of those pieces together and condense them in the very beginning.
So you guys comments from the online is it's very similar to Amazon's press release. So in Amazon, the PM is required to write the press release.
Yes.
In the beginning of the ideation process. So you have to think from the beginning of the process.
Exactly. You have a question?
So just extension to that question is, from what it sounds like, the manager is trying to ask you to tell us something from the product.
Yeah.
So are there any process to do check and balance between whether the story sounds appealing to the manager or it's really backed by probably informed data?
I wouldn't think it that way. I think in some way, maybe it depends on company culture. At least for a lot of the company I work for, if you think about your gatekeeper is your manager, you're not working on the right set of hypotheses, I would say, because ultimately, what is the criteria of the success of your product should be verified by the market, right? So we're not writing this story to make it sound appealing to the manager per se. That should never be the case. Ideation. Yeah, this is a forcing function for the product people to think from the very beginning, what is the problem you are solving? And whether this, usually once you write it down, most of the time, the people who are reading it can see whether that need is there. For example, let's say one of the product launch or product sort of ideation memo I wrote was about a feature to introduce alcohol as a product assortment in Google Express. Remember, I was talking about working on the same-day delivery product at Google. And I was writing this ideation doc talking about how we can sell alcohol through this same-day delivery platform. So my launch announcement was literally trying to talk about why this is a need and who I'm talking to. So I was talking about all the people who love to, watch their sports in front of their TV and don't want to go out and grab a beer. We're there for you. Somewhat, I don't remember the specifics, but that's kind of the product need I write there. And if you are just like an everyday person, you read this, you can resonate with it. Even you are not a beer lover, you have seen your friends being in that shoes. So that's the power of the launch announcement. It should be really very resonating. You are capturing a certain need that is out there.
Understood, but what I'm trying to say is for example, I'm just using an example. It would be a lot easier to justify a product launch if I say, oh, there's we have this much population, there's this many percentage of people that's in need of the product that has expressed the needs, and then there's this many percent of the people who will actually go out and buy it, and then we have this many competitors, and we won't be able to acquire this many percentage of the total market. That would be an easy way to quantify a potential market size.
I think if you're writing a launch announcement to engineers, that would be awesome sell. But if you're writing this to everyday Joe, I think most people will probably turn away after the first sentence. So data is important, don't get me wrong. Data is important to verify your own hypothesis or like inspire your hypothesis. That's in the later section of the doc, not in the first launch announcement. That's different, right?
I'm just trying to say how to justify to the manager about the need of the product.
I see. That's a separate issue. I think it's less so about product launch. You're talking about more like a stakeholder management. Can we talk about this later? Yeah, I think it's not really about the purpose of this doc. All right. This one I sort of earlier mentioned, the wish budget shoppers, and how it finds it's like, a core audience. So I'm gonna skip this one. Anyway, another example, this is a more dear to my area, machine learning. A lot of times product launch also needs explanation, and companies don't necessarily do it. And when that happens, that's also a favorite moment for product launch. So one concrete example is Twitter. I'm not sure if this is widely known, but back in 2014, Twitter was testing feed ranking, but they secretly tested, and they didn't even bother to change the timestamp. So very quickly, it caused a huge riot in the user community because people discovered like why my feed is so weird. They all ordered in random way, ordering, and what's going on. So very quickly, people discovered it was actually Twitter is testing feed ranking, but they didn't explain to the user. And this basically calling a lot of the tweet user to start tweeting about how bad this experience is and trying to ask them not to do so. So that was like a big issue. And thanks to this lesson, Instagram, when we were testing feed ranking, we were thinking about testing feed ranking, we realized we cannot follow that path. We cannot just go around doing this without telling the user. Partially because it's such a sensitive subject at the time, again, in 2014. Nowadays, I think most people accept feed ranking the norm. But back then, that's such a novel thing. And that's a thing that most people wouldn't accept. So hence we realized, okay, we have to tell the user before we do it. So explain your motivation sometimes is also very necessary for product launch. That's the one personal lesson I have. So here I sort of like coming from the AI world, especially if I don't know how many of you are AI product managers or worked on AI products. Can you raise your hands? One person. All right. Maybe this lesson is more like a lesson for you, or you can in general talk about more complex technology products or products that could have ethical consideration. In those scenarios, addressing the explainability of your product is very crucial. So the example I was talking about, that inspired Instagram to do, we actually decide to have this announcement to the user before even testing anything, just telling people why we even think about doing feed ranking, even we know this is something that they don't want us to do. So back then, this is a context sharing with you. When Instagram was acquired by Facebook, a lot of Instagram users were really scared that one day Instagram is going to rank the feed, just like how newsfeed is ranked. So hence, if we do market research, we actually did, most users will tell us, #1 hated feature, please never ever do it, is feed ranking. And we knew it for like 2-3 years. But then around 2014, we found out our sharing curve was declining because Instagram quality bar in the feed, I mean, even today, I will still say it's very high, right? So if you are kind of a new user, you want to make some sort of, stand out in Instagram, it's incredibly difficult because Kim Kardashian, those celebrities, some famous photographers. You feel like, okay, if I want to share on Instagram, my bar of photography has to be this high. So hence, most of the new users don't share that much. And even the old users are sharing less and less. So when we realize that problem, we know that feed ranking is actually the solution to solve that. Because what we really need to solve, the problem is helping people see the things that is relevant to them, instead of everything that they followed, and which could be completely crowded by all sorts of popularity feed. To the extent we found out 70% of the people's feed are not being read. Hence, it was a problem. But this is a very complicated problem, right? You could argue, how can you explain this to your end users so they can understand the sentiment? I mean, you can obviously explain to everyone one by one. We did this announcement, but before that, we also did identify a lot of the influencers in the communities who will have large following. And I actually flew down to different cities with my research team and go talk to those influencers one-on-one and explain just the story I just explained to you. And that was actually really helpful. Because around the time when we announced this particular sort of movement, a lot of the average users really upset with us. But because those influencers got the memo, right? They heard the explanation from me in person, they actually stood up and then stand up for us. They went to explain to their community. And that's a scalable model, right? I can't explain to all the millions of users out there, hundreds of millions of users there. But if I talk to some influencer, they talk to the other influencer, those influencers talk to other influencer, eventually it basically becomes this kind of web and talking to all the people. So again, not everyone get the memo, but majority of the most important channel, they got the memo. And hence all those kind of hatred or worry eventually died down. So that was kind of like one tactic we did. And in addition to that, we also send a lot of our tech lead engineers to explain what feed ranking is. It was, trying to explain machine learning technology is a daunting task. But when the product launch required that, we still did it anyway. So this is actually a very cartoon sort of description of how we rank the feed by our tech lead. And if you're interested, you can go watch the talk. He actually did a really good job to explaining how we do it. And first, why we do it, how we do it, and what are some of the innovation we applied to solve the problem. All right. And then another thing I want to show you, this is a way to explain a feature. So this is a Netflix example. We recently launched a feature called download. And again, if you just launch the feature quietly in the product, no one's gonna notice. And a lot of people will also ask, like, why you actually develop such a feature? Is it because, you know, we want to grow in certain APAC markets, or is it because we think there's a certain, you know, use case we want to address? Again, if you don't explain to the user, it's not very clear. So hence, we actually, when we launch, we developed this particular launch video, which I will play. That was actually a joke. It's the sound you know. And talking about success metric, since the launch, this particular feature has been used a lot. I can't give you the specific number, but it was a very successful launch. Usage is important, right? And we compare with another feature, that sharing button. We don't really make a fuss about or explain why we did it. It was just like never really used that much. So this is the kind of the difference between successful launch and a non-successful launch. And sometimes for the product person is recognize when you think it's the right moment to explain to your user, and when do you think that this should be self-explanatory. So that's kind of a judgmental call. All right, and another video I also want to show you. This is again an AI product. Again, if you are working on an AI product, you know this is really important to explain to a user why you're doing something. This is a Waymo video. I think it was when it first started.
Driving requires a lot from us, all just to get around. We can do better. If the world's most experienced driver was at your fingertips, a fully self-driving car, ready to take you where you need to go. A ride designed for you, giving you more time for things that matter most. What if getting there felt like being there? This is where we're going. Introducing self-service. Waymo 1.
So this one is very interesting. I actually have a mixed feeling about it. I think the video itself was really successful, but how many of you have watched it? Exactly. So it's kind of missed the mark of like where the audience it hits. So sometimes I will say like big companies like Google. Yeah, go ahead. Mm-hmm. Yes, so kind of going back to the framework I was talking about earlier, right? It's really important to start from your understanding of your audience, right? That's starting from there, and your hypothesis, who they are and where they are. And then hopefully as a product team, you have some idea where your audience are, right? If you don't even know that, remember we go back to the, I don't want to go back to the old slides about the persona, who they are, what their challenges, where they go, right? How we can help. This is kind of the framework you can identify. Hopefully through that exercise, you should know who they are and what channel to reach them. But those channels, you may not know the effectiveness. You should be able to know which channel, but you just don't know the effectiveness. The effectiveness is through this process, this wheel, to try to assess and then try to test and try to get a signal and then try to combat and then improve it. And sometimes maybe you're like a product hunt. You just hit the nail right away, So you get it, you don't have to iterate. A lot of times you have to keep testing, right? So I think the question of where you find those audience is actually through this iterative process to figure out. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's fair. I think it is still kind of like, I would say, not complete launched product, right? They kind of like to build it in one city. And there, they are building the momentum. And that was actually an intro video over there. But meanwhile, they do have an issue with branding though, because back then they were called Google Chauffeur service. So everyone knows about them through the Google. Once they banned as a Waymo, there's a lot of less people know about it. Maybe in the Valley, most of you know who is Waymo, right? Do you guys all know Waymo, right? Self-driving car company with Google. See, I'm just not sure. But outside the Valley, there's very few people know about it. I think in some way it is kind of like internally they know that is a problem, right? Like the audience that they are thinking about, I don't think it's very clear. And that's typical is a problem with big company, because what they want to aim is everyone. But if you think from the very beginning, this is for everyone, then you don't have this whole kind of cascade process, right? Identify your C community, then find your follower community, and then find everyone else. Because you just go for everyone else, but then in the end, everyone else doesn't know about you. And that's sort of the same mistake they had with Google Plus, also Google Glass. Remember Google Glass? Awesome product, technology-wise, is awesome. I have one. But in terms of product launch, in terms of product success, it makes a lot of marks because they try to solve everything, right, with that little device. And they try to serve everyone. And then in the end, you don't have a target audience. So I think Google is obviously a great company. I work for them. I still think the technology-wise is really strong. But a lot of time, because they think big, they will miss the most fundamental part. It's like, who are your key initial audience? And so for most of us out there who are not working for Google, if you work for a small company, this is really, really important to get it right? You don't also have the money as Google has to buy. So test and try. All right, let's continue. I have actually one more lesson, actually two more lessons to share. Poor preparation often is also a killer of product launch. And one example, this is again on actually tweets. Who plays games? Anyone plays electronic games, online games? No one? What? Oh, okay, at least I have one. We have a very quiet audience today. So I play with your game. So I learned about this particular example. It's very random. So they will actually have this shooter game set in World War I. So they try to promote this kind of like a launch of this first-person game, and then use this hashtag, just the WWI things. From the setup, it all seems fine. If you're doing online game, you hit a social media, that's the right channel. So channel-wise, no problem. And you try to come up with some sort of a hashtag, that's no problem too, right? The problem is in the video. I'm not gonna play it, it's a little bit offensive. The video looked almost like the soldier is being burned with some flame. Even it's kind of a fake. It's like a, CG, it's not really a real person, but it's not a great thing. It's kind of like a celebrating tones of someone being burned. So in reality, this campaign got a lot of backslash. People hate it. You think it is not sentimental, even including the gamers. They have many ways of promoting this game, right? But they just somehow decide to do this. To me, it's not an audience issue. They find the right audience, they find the right channel, right? And those people maybe in the game, they will burn the soldiers, but they lack the sensitivity of certain graphics or images. And I think it's kind of a result of poor preparation. They did it really quickly. Why I believe that? Because they also launched another one on a different, forgot which social media, they also launched a similar one, and it was also missed the mark. Even the first one was getting backslash, They didn't react to the second one until much later, a few hours later, then they react to both of them and take them down and apologize. So you can see the team was just not prepared. And they also don't have a good response mechanism. When things happen, they like the speed of dealing with this crisis is really slow. There are also a significance of poor preparation. So if you do your product launch great, hopefully you can anticipate those potential issues, right? You can be risky. If you have a hypothesis, this can work, but you should be prepared to take it down the minute this causes a problem, right? The fact it took them a few hours, I don't think they did a good job of preparation. So how to not to fail product launch, lesson 4, plan wisely. It's easy to say than being down. Again, I'm gonna give you some successful example. So how many people have watched Unbelievable? That's a recent series on Netflix. It's actually hugely successful. It's a story about a missing daughter and quite heartbroken story. I'm not gonna spoil alert here. But the way the company did, was actually not just regular, story launch, because this is very different. It's not like we're not trying to talk about the entertainment value here. It's a kind of based on a true story, and it was really heartbroken. So we actually got to reach out to a lot of the community and experts, and even psychologists and the nonprofit people and human rights people had a workshop with them. Use this title as a thought starter and just started a discussion how we can prevent similar things from happening. And it was so touching, and then reaching out to so many hearts. Oh, I didn't have another page. This one person who is actually a police woman, this is not Netflix website. You may think this is Netflix website. It's not. It's some police woman's website. She decided to create this one and raise the awareness of this cause and ask people to donate, and also obviously show the trailer of this series. And she was not alone to do so. So all of this not happening just like accidentally. It actually took the team months of work to identify, again, your key audience, right? Who you want to talk to, who are the influencers, who are the seed. So those are the seeds. There are a lot of women, a lot of people care about the subject. And then they listen, they discuss with us. And then they went back, use their own individual way to raise awareness. So we kind of achieved both goals. On one hand, this title was launched very successfully. We got a lot of viewing. On the other hand, it achieved the original goal of this producer, which is to raise awareness of this kind of issue and cause more people to take real action against it. So that is called planning. Another one, this is ads actually which my last company put in Europe. So I assume a lot of you haven't watched it, but I will play the ads. Well, let me talk about the context first, and then I'll play the ads. So it was last year's World Cup. And as you know, World Cup only for certain countries, right? A lot of countries went into the campaign, but a lot of them lost. So only certain ones that actually got into the World Cup. So think about those stars, those T players who didn't get into the World Cup. They're incredibly bored during that time, right? And then they also kind of sad. And then so we have this like idea, okay, we are launching a lot of the services in EMEA, in Europe. How about we just reach out to those famous stars who is not gonna have a schedule, busy exercise schedule, training schedule. They're available anyway. And also no other advertisement company are looking for them because they all go for the big players who are playing in World Cup. So much cheaper, right? But meanwhile, they still have a lot of followers. So let's play towards that event and see whether that can help us boost the sales there. So now, given that context, let me play this video for you. They're very bored. that was a very successful campaign. Obviously, we see a lot of dollars. Remember, like one of the reasons why the product launch is get more revenue. And this was also a lot of planning because someone had this great idea many months before the World Cup starts, and they start contacting those players since they don't have much other things to do. And it was actually reasonable budget campaign. Had we contact them, in a different timing, or contact the player who are playing in World Cup, the budget probably will be blow up 3 times, 4 times, or 10 times. Question. Yeah, so let me repeat the question. So the question roughly basically saying, like, I think this kind of a marketing launch campaign is not product manager's job. It's some other function's job. So how do we know, this is actually our job? So in general, I believe, unless you are in a huge company that you have a lot of supporters, I wouldn't just artificially say this is not my job and this is my job. What is product manager's job? Or generally, what is product person's job, right? Is to develop and launch a successful product, period. So if you have an idea, this can help with your product launch, obviously you can go reach out and have someone help you, for sure. And the idea may not necessarily come from you, that's for sure. But I don't think this will be, oh, this is not my responsibility kind of zone. Launching the product successfully is really, really important for a product team, right? So even like go back to the first example I show you, that little QT video. Obviously I didn't make that video. I don't have that creativity, but it was my product that needs to be launched. So I had to go reach out to someone and then start a discussion. Eventually someone else come up with this specific idea, but the audience, who are the audience, right? What kind of sentiment I'm addressing? What is the product mission here? What is the angle of the product launch? All this comes from the product person, which is me. Same here, right? Like maybe all the specific creativity, it comes from, this is actually from an agency. It's not even the company itself. Like we don't have that creative people, I wish. But the idea, the goal, right? The mission, why we want to launch in Europe, all this comes from the product team. Because we recognize Europe is a huge market for us. We have conquered somewhat the, budget shoppers in US. We are eager to grow in other markets that is similar to US, or is better market than Europe, right? In terms of the taste, in terms of the language, there's a lot of a possibility. So how do we connect to that market? So the goal, the vision, again, the needs is coming from the product team. And the timing is coming from the product team as well, right? If the product team decide to do this much later and miss the World Cup, then this idea will not be helpful. So I think in many times, product manager or in general product people, I think our responsibility is very in flux. And it really depends on who you work with. If you have a talent team that everyone can do everything wonderfully, that maybe your only job is set the North Star and tell people, here they go for it. That's it, job down. But a lot of times you have to figure out, okay, if the team is lacking certain capacity, you have to fulfill that particular portion. But I wouldn't just prematurely say, this is not my job, hence, this is not part of discussion. Yeah.
So what if, let's say, a local campaign, but in product management has never done a campaign like this before?
Yeah.
And how to make sure you have the right resources to make sure the campaign works right for them? How do we get resources to become?
Sorry, I try to understand your question. Are you saying?
My team doesn't really have product marketing working on this campaign.
Okay.
They work on copies and make ads, but they don't really create this.
Okay.
I want them to actually create a campaign. How can I get resources?
Oh, you mean your team? I see. You mean your team doesn't have resource to create this kind of campaign, but you have the idea trying to do something like that. I see. I think I will start with the kind of like a proposal, right? And then try to figure out like whether you can get buy-ins from people or teams who can give you either budget or resource or talent to do so. You know, usually one of these three will help solve this problem, right? If you have the talent within the company, you may just need the introduction or buy-in from that team to help you. If you don't have the talent in the company, you may just need the budget, right? In which case we have the budget to do so. But then you have to justify why you have to burn $1 million, $2 million to do this campaign. What is your end goal? And like talking about the data, right? If you say, because if I do this, I can increase the revenue by 10 million, then maybe this 1 million is totally justifiable, right? So I think this is more about your vision and your goal and how you convince people and then figure out the rest of the things. And then sometimes maybe the answer, because they're really small, right? We don't have $1 million to burn, so you can't do something like this, right? But you can try to think about something that's reasonable to your scale. Like the product hunt example, right? They're not burning any money. They just pull through their social connection. Obviously, for his particular example, that works. So you have to find what is sort of appropriate for your case. I'm not trying to say everyone should now go out and be creative and burn $1 million to create something campaign like that with a celebrity or world-class, player. I'm just saying, remember timing and planning is really important here. So the meta point matters. Yes.
You should not of product as you to have experience or share some of the experience on the product that's didn't work on the very beginning for the first month and then maybe adjust it and then we launch.
Actually, Wish is that example. A lot of you may not know, in the very beginning, the product was like, I think it took like 7 years, right? The first 2 years, the whole company was pivoting. The reason why it's called Wish, the first version of this product was not a mobile shopping app. It was not a platform app. It was actually a plugin that you can bookmark products you saw on the website. And they say, I add this to my wish list. And then the whole company was hoping by building that wish list, we can predict people's demand and sell the demand to suppliers. And that some sort of money can come through that. And that product didn't work. And hence they pivot. When they pivot, they look at the data and they found out a lot of the demand coming from people buying cheap stuff. And that's how they pivot towards today. So this is actually, Wish took a while to get to today. And I think it's true for Instagram too. I don't know how many of you know about Instagram's old story. Do you know its first version is called Bourbon? It's Kevin and Mike. They had this grand idea, but at the time when they were starting Bourbon as a team, location-based apps was a hit. So they were writing a location-based social network app called the Bourbon. And it was such a failure, no one used it. Only thing that was savaging was somehow the photo sharing portion of the app. So they kicked out, they had lots of features. They like basically threw away all the features, say, hey, this photo sharing thing seems to be working. The filtering, somehow people are using it. Still, back then, maybe a few hundred people, we're not talking about even thousands. And then they start working on this. And bits by bits, eventually become Instagram. So most products are not like product hunt, just a launch at the first day and it works. It takes a while, yeah. All right, let's, I have a last, oh, hold on. I hope I didn't click something wrong. Did it work? Okay, so I do want to sort of like give a little bit framework too, because I don't want you to just walk away thinking, oh, I watched some pretty videos today. I remember some big giant bullet points and that's it. I want you to walk away with some sort of a useful framework you can apply to your day-to-day work. So when I say plan wisely, this is the one set of a template you can consider. Obviously, you can always take someone else's template, customize to your own use case. The details, you probably can't read it very well, but I will just like, walk you through. You first of all, again, set the goals, right? It's really important for any sort of product launch plan to think about the goals. What was the goal? And then hopefully from the very beginning in your product development phase, you already know. And then the second important thing is the positioning, identifying your targeting audience. That's the same thing, right? You have to understand what is kind of like your market position of your product, right? Are you trying to appeal to a gap in terms of needs? Or are you trying to attract to a different set of customer needs? Or are you trying to play with the angle of pricing, right? Or are you trying to play the angle of convenience? Like you need to know your selling point. So when I say positioning, it's your selling point. Why people should listen to you? Why should people pay attention to your product, right? And once you know that, then that should naturally flow with your target customers. And then you should be able to use those two things to craft your value messaging. So here is basically the story element. You may have a gigantic story, you know, a pitch in the beginning, but when you're thinking about product launch, you need to actually start thinking about for what kind of people, what is the message I want to deliver? And that message hopefully is very succinct. It should be one sentence. It should not be like, you know, earlier this gentleman was talking about based on this percentage points and based on that percentage points, hence you should do this one. That will never be a good message, right? The message should be like, you know, some of the product launch video I show you, right? Like delight all the moms. That's a successful metrics, a successful messaging. Or you say, download it, you know, have your favorite story with you as you go. You should be able to write succinctly your message in one sentence. And a successful product launch, you should be like one target audience, one message, one target audience, one success sort of value messaging. And once you have the messaging and the target audience, you should also finding the matching channels to deliver them. Some of those messaging maybe should be a tweet. Some of those messaging should be delivered through a TechCrunch article, right? Some of those maybe should be an article on Product Hunt. Some of those could be a search keyword optimization, right? You have to figure out where your audience is, and hence you can craft that messaging towards them. And then you try to build your following bits by bits. Remember the framework, seed, follower, and the mass, similar, and then test and see feedback. And then this process just like iterate until you feel like you get to the right setup. And that's your plan. And many times in big company, once you have a plan, it's not the end of the story. For example, Facebook has this like famous thing called murder board. Have you heard about it? Murder board. So it's when you have a big product launch, you literally call upon all the VPs and the important people in the company, and they're gonna ask you a question. Their sole job is to be the devil of an advocate and ask all the possible challenging situation or risks to you, the product owner. And you and your team hopefully have enough sort of preparation to answer and address it. And if you don't, go back and figure out your response plan. That's how big companies do. Why? Because most of the big companies like Facebook and Google, on even Netflix, is under scrutiny, right? So you want to make sure when you have a big product launch coming up, all those potential risks in PR or legal or whatever is addressed. Small company, you can still try to do something similar. You may not have all the VPs in the room, but you and your own team or your boss or stakeholders can try to think about all the potential risks of your plan, right? All the potential failure of your plan. Hopefully give you that data points, maybe how you can respond to it, or how can you monitor it. And sometimes one example is like, maybe one risk factor is your infrastructure is not solid. You cannot handle the volume you think you handle. This is the common pitfall, right? I don't know how many of you know about Disney Plus recently, the launch story. I would say that's a failure launch. Not because they're all competitor, because they said they misforecast their volume. They think they underestimate how many people they want them. I mean, they try to spin the story in a positive way. But reality is they couldn't handle the traffic. So their website crashed. I try not to be that story in the valley. Like you launch your product and the site just crashed. That's a failure planning process for your product launch, right? You can do better than that. So. All right, last lesson I want to share, and this is probably kind of cover that scalability issue I just mentioned. I'll just call it technology deficiency. Many times, everything else, all the checkbox, you checked, turns out the product didn't work. So one failing example is Samsung Note 7, right? This product, I don't know how long it took the product team to develop this product. And the product itself probably have no problem, but somehow they never, you know, know or predicted this issue that the product itself can go overheating and then in terms of actually eventually caught fire. So for a while, I forgot which year, it was like 2016 or 17. If you go travel, right, you always have this note, like, do you have Samsung Note 7? If so, you cannot onboard the airplane. You certainly don't want your product be like that on a watch list of the airplane. So to me, this is really just like technology deficiency. So try to deliver your promise. If you promise your customer you can stream their favorite videos, please stream them. There's no excuse your site crash. And if you promise your users that your product can actually heat their sandwich, please heat that sandwich. Do not overburn. It seems easy, but it's actually really hard. All right, so this is kind of like, I didn't talk about a lot of the major lesson, but this is the 5 things I think is really important and are the common failures, I would say, of product launch. So try not to do the stuff on the left side, right? Do not fix a non-existing problem. Understand your customer needs instead. Do not target the wrong market. Identify your product correctly. Do not produce a product that requires explanation, but you somehow don't explain it. Explain your motivation to your user. Try your best. There's ways. Sometimes you have to do things that don't scale. That's Paul Graham's, the founder of Y Combinator, always say. Do the things that don't scale if it's necessary. Do not have a full preparation for a product launch. You did all the hard work to develop your product, right? The last milestone. Think carefully. Plan wisely. And then lastly, deliver your promise. No surprise. If you promise your end user something, make sure that thing happened. Otherwise, all your hard work goes with. All right, so that's the whole presentation. Thank you.
Thanks, Chen, for the amazing presentation. And now we're taking questions. I have some Dory questions. I will say maybe 2 on-site and then 1 Dory. Okay? Yeah. Okay.
One question. So you mentioned the judgment of the decision whether you should do a launch campaign. And you actually explain for the examples of the decision criteria to make that judgment.
You mean the judgment decision criteria for launching a campaign or not launching a campaign?
Yeah, let's talk about how you just actually release it and then maybe see the results.
Yeah. 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 That's a really good question. So for the online audience, let me just repeat. Basically, the question is about what is the decision criteria to decide whether we need a product campaign or not. I think this is, first of all, there's a several kind of layer of decision. It's not just one criteria fits all. First of all, you need to understand the nature of your product, right? If your product is a consumer-facing product, it's more likely to have a product launch. If it's like a business-facing product, or it's an algorithm product that is not kind of like serving majority of the market, having a campaign might be too wasteful, right? What you want to do is finding the target audience, the specific audience that will actually pay or use your product. So I think first criteria is it a consumer-facing product or not, right? And the second, you also try to figure out, do your current product have the mechanism of announcing the product itself? So let's say if you're Facebook, your social media company, you already have the most effective channel to reach mass market, right? Then product campaign maybe not as important. But let's say you're a company who doesn't own one of the most important channels like Facebook or Google, right? And then you do have to appear to the mass market. Then you may have to consider a product campaign. So second criteria, do you own, kind of like the channel that you want to use? And then third is also about kind of the trade-off. It's more like a budgeting question. Do you have the budget or the resource you need to do the product campaign? And then for a lot of startups or entrepreneurs, that question probably is very easy to be answered. Like you don't have it, Then if you don't have it, you just have to be creative to do something else. But let's say you do have the budget, you have the money, and then you could return something stronger than your cost, then maybe that's okay. So in general, I would say there's a 3 sort of step function to decide. But that's not all the criteria I listed. Sometimes it's also about timing, right? About what kind of campaign you're thinking about, and also thinking about what kind of effectiveness you are expecting. Certain product, even you do a product campaign, if people don't try it, they can't see its value, then product campaign will not work. Even if it's a consumer-facing product, even if it's for mass market, even if you don't own the channel, right? But if people have to try it to know it, let's say furniture. Rarely you will see a product campaign for furniture, right? Think about it. Do you see a lot of product campaign videos about furniture? No, because furniture is something actually you have to go and feel and test it and potentially have to see, measure, a lot of decision criteria. A house, another kind of item you have to feel in real life. And then in those cases, even if it's appear to supposedly mass market, a product campaign will not work.
Okay, I'll take a question here. I think many folks are very interested into your personal failure in the product launch, or how do you deal with that scenario. Maybe you can use some kind of general example, like when emergency happens. Like, yeah, and then what is the usual or most common way to fix those? Yeah.
That's a really good question. Of course, I have a lot of failures. If you work on product long enough, it's hard to avoid failures. So one of the failure I had, that was the early days at Google. We were working on kind of like an enterprise product, as I mentioned, right? With my initial working experiences developing business intelligence applications for Google use cases. And this is one product we were trying to build was basically a budget kind of tools for people to use. And this audience we were set up is the budget managers at Google. So those people people who are planning for headcounts or planning for how much money or planning for how much sort of computer resource. So I naively assumed that in launching this product, really, I just go do an email blasting. I was very junior at the time. And then just telling all the people who are going to use this tool, and that's it. I just show them like, this is nice, can I have a demo video? Here is the website, here's the tool, just go use it. My job is done. And then I look at my usage metric. It's like 2% use it. There are like at least 100 people out there who could use this tool, only 2% use it. And then I'm like, okay, at least I should go talk to some people, figure out why. And then when I talk to people, then I realize, okay, my product is actually quite complicated. The tutorial I thought I put together, people don't have time to kind of watch it. Even they watch it, they have questions. I'm not there to answer their questions. So, and then when they try the product, they have a lot of question mark because I was not a good designer, I was not a good product manager for sure. So there's a lot of confusion, right? So they try a few times, so they give up. So what I realized for that kind of an enterprise product, you may say, you really need a very hand-holding with your end user, right? So I actually had to go and give talks and tutorials to all those people. So part of my product launch process was actually trying to bring the product in front of them and explain it. Remember one of the failure, do not explain your product. So in my case, like I definitely had that problem before, without explaining my product sufficiently enough. And then through this interaction process, I also can learn, what works, what doesn't work, what usability issue I have. So that kind of a whole lesson helped me start reflecting the way we launch product, especially for enterprise.
Okay, cool. Yeah, another question I think someone just mentioned. Do you have another question? Yeah, sure, go ahead.
Yeah. Oh, not related for that launch. Maybe we should first finish and then get there. Product pricing. Can we leave this till the end? Make sure like all the other product launch related questions are answered.
There's another way is like the functional team collaboration. And
oh yes, yes.
Manage the expectation from the stakeholder.
Oh yes.
There's like last minute change or those kind of issues.
Yeah, in general, that is I saw several people asking questions around that line in the questionnaire. I will just repeat this. The question is about how we manage the stakeholder relationship during product launch. Because usually, especially if it's a consumer-facing product launch or some complicated product launch for enterprise domain, right? The stakeholder we have is like gigantic list. How do you manage those relationships? I think there's a lot of tactics that I can share, but I will share some of the principles. This probably will help you figure out the tactics yourself. I think principle-wise, number one is over-communicate. Like if you feel you communicate enough, you're still not communicating enough. Many times this is a kind of a daunting task for product people or product manager, but you have to take down that challenge. And if you can build some alliance with someone who like a program manager or PMM, if you have those people to help you, that's awesome, bless you. But if you don't, you would have to take on that challenge and diligently figure out a plan. I call it like a communication plan. First to understand, it's kind of as similar as you're building a product, right? First to understand who are the audience, right? Always start with the people, you know, who are the people out there? What's their job? What's their goal? What's their function? If you can meet with them in person, one-on-one, if you can, at least get some understanding of their job function. Because if you don't understand who you are dealing with, all the rest of things just fall apart, right? So the first thing is understand who are your stakeholders, and then have a way to get them together, have like a kickoff meeting. This is basically setting up the foundation and the common sort of context with everyone. Why are you guys doing this? What's the goal? You know, who is the who? Make sure everyone knows everyone and they know who you are. So they have questions, they can come to you. And then ask them, all of them in the room, right? What is the preferred method of communication? Some people will say, I prefer weekly meeting. Some people will say, I prefer emails. Some people say, I will prefer newsletter, right? Write those down. These are the preferences of your stakeholders and try to use their preferred method to communicate with them. So over-commute, but also understand who you're communicating with. And the second, importantly, is bring everyone along. I have an image in my mind. Unfortunately, I can't project it here. Think about product manager or product leader is like a person sort of like, or a conductor. You can think about conductor. Or a person who's like making some beautiful music, but you have a large following behind, right? So naturally, you standing in front of everyone means you see everything ahead of everyone, and all your team and your stakeholder follow behind. And depends on who they are in their job function. Some of them may be very, very behind, right? And if you measure the distance in terms of information speed, this less, some of them could be weeks or months. Why this image is important is that, you know, you have to like have a forcing function in your brain, thinking about, even if I assume everyone knows, actually a lot of people in my team, they all know information at different kind of speed. And then maybe this person knows what I know a week ago. This person knows what I know a month ago. This person knows what I know 2 months ago. So that you have to plan deliberately the time and channel and a method to making sure people stay in sync with you. And if you don't do that, you will get into a situation like, why people are not agreeing with me? That's because you know day 0 information when everyone else is day minus, 15, day minus 30. That's why you're not on the same page, right? So if we want everyone to go along with you, agree with you, execute your plan, you have to try to shorten that minus, right? If everyone stay on the same day with you, then a lot of things work much faster. So that's the second principle I call like just be aware of the information delay and bring your people along with you during the journey. And then the third thing, also try to be very selfless and share the credit as much as you can. Celebrate as frequently as you can. And this is just keep the team morale high. This is so important because we are eventually all human beings, right? Emotion runs us. We don't run on emotion. Even when mature people, we think we get it, but ultimately, you are motivated by your own emotion. So that your partners too. So when you're working on a product launch, it's actually a really daunting task. At the end of that journey, remember that rocket launch that I initially showed you? I think that's like really a vivid depiction of this whole thing, right? If you're successful, everyone should be in the room and cheering. But that moment is so short and so long ahead. How do you keep rallying the people, get to that final moment? Then you have to kind of like, clap along the way, every single small step, right? And also try to share your credit as much as you can. Because ultimately, even you don't ever mention your name, everyone knows who you are. Remember, like in the very beginning, we set up the meeting, everyone knows who you are. You are in the center of the stage. You are the stage. So you don't need to give yourself credit. Instead, you need to share and always call, oh, blah, 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 you did a great job. Blah, 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 you did a great job. And then everyone will feel like they are moving along with you. So I will just share these 3 principles.
I see. Thank you. That's really nice. A follow-up is actually just a little bit different when you get support from the marketing, legal, customer support, or is the same with all the rest of the
Sorry, can you repeat?
Sure. The question is like, how do you get support from the stakeholders, like legal,
I see.
customer support? Yeah.
So the question is, how do we get support from legal, customer service, or in the various marketing stakeholders? I think this is really depends on what you are launching. If it's a company priority, I guess it's very easy for you to get the support because it's like, you know, prioritized. But if you're launching a product that, let's say, the other extreme, no one cares, right? It will be very hard for you to get that support. Ultimately, it's like getting support from anyone or getting resources, you know, from anywhere. It's about buying, and it's about the story you're telling. If your story is compelling enough, a lot of people will help you. And if your story compelling in the sense that you help other people achieve their goals, they will follow you. So that's kind of like a general principles.
I have a question, so I think it's maybe more related to entrepreneurs. So for entrepreneurs, from the cycle of finding the product positioning to basically launch your minimum viable product, it's probably likely for the entrepreneurs to repeat that cycle many times until they successfully, you know, find the right position.
Correct.
Right? So, you know, that's why people keep saying that, you know, pivoting and then need to fail fast.
Yes.
But I've also seen a lot of startups, they keep pivoting for many years.
Yeah.
And they never find the right position.
Yes.
And it seems, you know, the pivoting, the action itself doesn't teach them anything. So I'm just wondering, what's your opinion on pivoting the product?
That's a really good question. It's almost sometimes like a cliche, right? Like pivoting again. I think it's partially about why those people are together at the first place. Now, if they are together just because they want to start something, but they're not clear about what that something is, then they're very likely to be the team who just keep pivoting. Because they just want to start something together, but they don't have a clear mission. They don't have a clear understanding what they're solving. A better team would be they're together because they all see a real need. The need is so painful. They're willing to give up their, you know, comfortable job or you know, give up their own time to work dedicatedly towards solving that need. And the need hopefully is so painful that it's not gonna go away very quickly. Hence, even they're pivoting, they're really pivoting the solution. They're not pivoting the problem. So I would say the first kind of pivoting, no matter how many times you pivot, what they learn potentially is some sort of tactics. They're not gonna really solve the fundamental needs. And hence a lot of those will still end up failure. But for the second one, they do have a very clear mission, clear need state. Then what they're pivoting potentially may get them closer to that end state that can solve the problem. Maybe they can still fail, could be like this need is just hard to solve, right? But at least I think that they are a little bit ahead than the other one.
Any questions? So maybe I will read the more
Sure. Any question online or just want to make sure?
Just asked.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, this question is like how to choose the best timing for the product launch.
Oh, yes. So we kind of touched upon this earlier a little bit. There's a few factors in play, right? On one hand, obviously, your engineering team has a certain speed of executing. Hence, even planning to launch now. Who is Amy's phone? Can you mute? Sorry. All right. So there's one is feasibility, right? Like you probably have a window, you know, from then and then forward you can launch, right? It's kind of, you have a minimal value. And then the second factor is the market dynamics, as I mentioned earlier, right? Where your competitors or your ecosystem is doing. And sometimes maybe a policy is coming up going to help you. You may want to wait. Or sometimes it could be the people that you want to use as influencers to help with your campaign, only available a certain time, like the Wish example, launching EMEA, you want to wait, right? And sometimes it could be your competitor is going to launch a very similar product. You want to speed up and launch earlier. So those external factors in the market dynamics could affect this decision. And then third is also about kind of like the seasonality, what your end users are doing. So traditionally for e-commerce especially, these things that matter a lot, right? You launch around the holiday season versus you don't launch around the holiday season can make a meaningful difference. Similar with entertainment. Like anything that sort of target on fundamental needs of the people, you have to be aware of people's calendar. Hence the seasonality matters a lot. So I think there's kind of like 3 guidelines. There's for sure a lot of other factors you could consider, but these are the 3 major things to determine.
See, the last question, I know maybe we have a different session to talk about this, but
Yeah.
many people are interested in this.
Yes, yes.
So maybe you can
Sure.
It's like how to measure the success of a product launch, what the most useful or common, success metric.
Yeah, I think somewhat we sort of discussing this earlier, right?
Yeah.
About this one. I think it's like the metric workshop, we talk about this. Metric comes from what the angle is. And I listed a lot of angles earlier. If your angle, let's say the expanding your audience, right? Then your metric have to measure like daily active user, that's sort of like user number related metrics. And if you say you want to increase product sales, then your metrics naturally is going to be the dollar revenue. And if your angle was some sort of a usage, right? You want a lot of people to use this feature like a download, right? We're not really using this to drive revenue or whatever, then I probably want to measure the usage of this feature. And then let's say if your angle is increasing retention of your product, this is especially important for startups, right? Because you want to find the product market fit, then retention should be the success metric. So I think it depends on what your angle of your product launch is when trying to achieve, then your measurement will be very different.
Yeah, sounds good. More questions?
There was one question earlier. I forgot who like has not related to product launch. Is there a question really? Yeah, of course.
For example, oftentimes you have some metrics that say awareness,
Yeah.
How successful your launch is. But let's say you get a bunch of strategies, right? Do you actually attribute, the metric strategies?
I see. So you're talking about attribution of where the success metric coming from, right? Hopefully, well, it depends on your situation. Some of the product may not be able to do it. Hopefully, before you launch your product, if it's like a digital product, you could run A/B test. So you can sort of measure the incrementality of your feature or your product on whatever the core metric is. Then that is your baseline, basically a multiplication that you can use. Right? Later on, when you see the success metric, you can know what is the meaningful difference coming from this product, because you can extrapolate the traffic and calculate literally, right? But let's say you can do an A/B test, then a lot of this is not causational, it's correlational. All you can do the best is as a company, if you didn't launch any other major product, that probably is due to you, but otherwise you cannot really attribute very well. The best attribution always comes from tests, if you can do it, yeah. Oh, sometimes you could also get it through a third party. If let's say you did this launch more through like Facebook, or Google, right? They have really good sort of like attribution mechanism that may help too. Yeah, exactly. But that's sort of depends on what channel you're using.
Okay. Just a follow-up on that. So if one of the goals that you want to achieve is like user life, which is probably experience and what are some of the metrics that you measure that?
You mean people delight by the experience?
By the experience.
Oh, okay.
Like, oh, wow, this is so cool.
Yeah.
Experience.
Yeah. Okay, so let me repeat the question. The follow-up question is, if the goal is delight the user, how do we measure that? Because that's a sentiment, it's hard, right? There are actually many ways. Ultimately, you know, if you delight the user, people love your product, they should naturally engage more. So you could potentially see through the usage data, right? For example, social media is like, you know, time spent, right? You could also see through retention. If you running some test, you potentially power enough and run longer enough, hopefully we'll see a meaningful difference on the retention. And if all of these, you know, not giving you enough signal, sometimes you can also run survey, in-app survey. So one thing that Facebook did is called the Shiplog survey. Basically, they have this brand sentiment survey as well as the survey about, in general, people's satisfaction and love towards Facebook. It's actually quite sensitive. You can see this curve actually change along with major launch or major issues with the company. So that's another way, but you need to establish a baseline, right? You cannot just say today I want to measure and I want to see difference. Hopefully you have been doing this for a while, then you can see how your product launch affected, right? Is it being better or being lower? So that's another way.
Yeah, we're about the time. So
Okay.
One more
One more question? Yeah.
one more question.
Pricing questions. So
Okay.
with B2C product, you can find a lot of pricing information.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. However, for the B2B product, there's not a lot of information in the market.
Yeah.
So you can talk with a few like consultants, a few analysts who give you a little bit information about how you want to define. But for B2B products, really sometimes we kind of customize to price both sides, right? So basically, I'm doing this B2B pricing. I really find it difficult to define it. So you also.
So is this a question about pricing? How to?
So how do you research? How
I
do
see.
you come up with a relatively accurate pricing strategy?
I see. B2B pricing, I mean, I'm not definitely the expert here, but it's really depends on a few kind of ways. In general, it's actually similar as B2C too. One way is kind of value driven. Basically, you try to figure out what value you bring to your customer, your end user, right? Like, and for example, some tool you give them is productivity tools. You help them save how much percentage of end time. You help them save how much percentage of the cost. And then you can say, you know, I save you $10 million per year. I just take a one cut, maybe 10% of it. That will be my pricing, right? So that's one way, value-based. Second one is kind of like cost-based. You try to figure out how much does it take for you to do it. And then for a lot of the consulting service company, you know, they're B2B too, right? They charge by their hours, right? That's cost-based. They're like, okay, I have to pay this amount of money to my employee to give you this report, then I have to add a certain margin. Hence, this is the charge, this is the bill. So that's another way. And the third way is kind of a benchmark. You look at in the market, similar product offering like your service. Usually B2B is hard to be completely differentiated. Usually someone else is doing something similar, maybe worse than you, maybe better than you. If you can get their pricing strategy, then you bet your customer know about those two because they're comparing, right? They're comparing you against others. Then you better know what the others are offering in terms of the pricing. So if you're small, you want to be a little bit, you know, aggressive in terms of pricing. You want to be positioned a bit lower than them. But if you, let's say you're very established, you are the industry leader, then you may afford to be a little bit above the market value, right? So that's called benchmarking. So roughly, I think the pricing strategy of any product is coming from these three ways. Of course, there's a fourth way, forgot. The fourth way is just called like emotional pricing, I'll say. It's like you purchase fashion brands, I forgot that, you know, like luxury product. It's really about how much people can afford. Like if you really like a product, you kind of like, you're showering someone you love, right? You want to give a lot of money to your wife or your kids. It's the same idea. If you love a certain brand, you basically shower them as much as you can. And hence they can charge a very premium price. But that's rarely used in technology.
So if it's a completely new product, is pricing part of the launching process?
It could be. It very could be, because sometimes the pricing is part of the launching strategy. You can argue Xiaomi use this very deliberately, right? They actually literally, that is their value prop. The value prop is the pricing. They are trying to say, look, we're very similar to iPhone in all these different dimensions, but we're much cheaper than them, right? So it could be, but not every product use that as their sort of strategy. Because if your product is naturally more expensive or similar expensive as the other stuff, then that's not your advantage. It's your disadvantage. So you don't really talk about it. But if it is your advantage, of course, you should talk about it as one of the value messaging to your target audience.
Okay, that sounds good. I think we can start right now. I would say, please join me to thank Chen for this amazing session.
Thank you, guys. And then traditionally, we take a picture.
Yeah, please stay, take a picture to memorize this special session before Thanksgiving. Thanks for being here like on Friday night, just like before Black Friday.
Thank you all.
Okay, thank you guys.
People who are not in our WeChat group can come to me and
Yeah.
we will have some like discussions or like
And then we also have actually recruiting information there, usually.
Yeah, we're looking for the volunteer.
we'll see you this time.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, everyone come up. Let's take a photo.